MFA. Next week, we have the Noack, the Mexico City Collective, and the week after, Prem Krishnamurthy from P. Berlin, New York, and more throughout the summer. I just wanted to say a few words about Ruth Noack and about her work, if I may. It's not too long, I promise. Through many years of dedicated work, Ruth Noack has established a delicate position within the cultural sphere, informed by a commitment to the ethical potential of art. In the exhibition she curates, she builds counterintuitive perspectives based on finding art and artists whose work balances political urgency and aesthetic sensibilities. During her seminar at PNCA this week, she asked the students, "How successful are you at preserving energy?" We are reminded that art is a place where energy is invested, but art is also a source of energy and redistributes energies. Art arbitrates between opposing yet complementary energies. For example, the rational pursuit of truth is as important as the intuitive and poetic acceptance of ambiguity. Ruth Noack shows paths between rational and the poetic must be tempered by ethics. Concretely, in her curatorial role at Documented 12 in 2007 on the migration of forms, that was one of the main themes. And it was among the most diverse documentas ever, and also showed the most female artists in the history of documenta, demonstrating how the ideas and visual forms travel among us. And these are our collective shared humanity. So welcome, Ruth, but please, Amy and Melissa, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. We welcome Ruth Noack to our incredible PNCA Visiting Faculty Lecture Series. Ruth Noack is based in Berlin and Washington, D.C. She is an author, art critic, university lecturer, and exhibition maker since 1990s, trained as a visual artist and an art historian. Ruth is perhaps best known for co-curating the prestigious biennial Documenta 12 in 2007. Currently, she is the executive director and curator of the Corner at the Whitman Walker in Washington, D.C., a brand new art initiative started this year, which is fascinating. The Corner at the Whitman Walker is an exciting new culture center in Washington, D.C., and its physical space was at one time the lobby of the Whitman Walker Clinic, which has served LGBTQ community members needing a space to receive stigma-free care and treatment, in some cases facing their own death due to HIV. Now this space has been completely transformed to bring different ideas of culture and diverse communities into contact with one another. Due to the COVID-19, the Corner at Whitman Walker is closed at this time, but we wonder what it's like to start something wonderful yet be on hold. In her many culture projects, Ruth has acted as a research leader for the EU project MILA, European Museum in an Age of Migrations, like Aaron said. She was Solon Professor at the Academy of Fine Arts Prague from 2013 to 2014. And between 2015 and last year, she was responsible for one of the Dutch Art Institute's Roaming Academy tracks. Her most recent symposium called Between Resistance and Hallucination in 2018 was released within the DAI Planetary Campus. And myself and Amy and all the PNCA would like to give a warm welcome to Ruth Noack.
That was both of us.
Okay, wow, amazing. Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Amy and Aaron and Weston and PNCA for having me and supporting me so beautifully. I'm very tickled by your introductions. I do have one remark to make about them though, and that is I tell my students they're never to say that someone's based somewhere. And I don't want to be defined as being based somewhere because I believe that this term comes from the military. And it's also suggestive of a highly problematic form of how the art world globalized, which is that some people, being global means somehow that you get to travel. And that means you have to have certain passports, and other passports really, people with other passports really have a problem to keep up with this. And it's also a question of money. And so this idea that you're somehow based somewhere, but you are constantly on the move, is a really problematic idea. And so I'm trying to say that I live somewhere instead of saying I'm based somewhere. But you can't know that, and everyone in the art world uses this term. So it's like my pet peeve. Now my computer turned off. So thank you, audience and participants. I'm very sorry that I can't see your faces, but I'm very glad that you joined us. And please bear with me if I have trouble with switching gears from images to clips. I have help and support, but it's my first Zoom lecture ever. So as a lecturer, I rely very much on visual material as a form of knowledge production. And at times you might have caught me at purposely using images to contradict my words, so that my audience becomes aware of the power of visuality and also of the way we privilege the spoken word, even though our world is made up so much by images. Will the works and clips that I brought for you today resonate through Zoom? I don't know yet. Let's find out. A second preamble. After curating the high octane Documenta 12, which showed over 500 works in 100 days to 750,000 viewers. That was in 2007, as Melissa, I think, said. I resisted the temptation to join the circle of curators willing to accept exploitative conditions of production of international shows in order to appear in the art world as relevant or attractive curators. The others are not stupid or weak. They do not do what they need to do to survive in a creative capital economy. But my own creative process is most important to me. Being a professional, not so much. So I radically slowed down. Numerous times I was invited to do biennales or other large-scale shows just to find that I would be forced to accept, to churn out a product that would not satisfy my own standards of quality, and most often also not deal with artists the way that I want to deal with artists. And that's not always an economical question. Sometimes it's also about timing. Artists are suddenly, and curators are asked to produce these shows in much too short a time. And the best example of that is Venice Biennale, which is like a horror to do, really a horror to do for artists, very traumatic often. And you don't see that as a visitor, or you don't see that in the written up in the text articles about it. You know, the text and articles, and the visitors and the professionals who come to visit only see the glam part of it, but it's very debilitating to do, because there's also this high pressure. Everyone looks, but then the structures behind it, the structures of production are just not sufficient at all. And that's just a discrepancy that people have, you know, it's hurtful to navigate that. So instead, I returned to Bohemia to write about artwork that interested me, to research my topics without immediate goal in mind. I returned to teaching, working with students, with children. And I sat at artists' kitchen tables, construing shows out of thin air sometimes we would like to do together, some of which I turned into shows, mostly into essay exhibitions. So these were then self-organized shows, like we did in the 90s, long before Documenta. Until I ended up in Washington, DC, of all places, where I'm proud to have joined Whitman Walker Health, which has grown out of the LGBTQ struggle for access to healthcare during the AIDS epidemic, into an organization which welcomes all persons and treats clients with dignity, respect, and love. Here I'm charged to build up a space for experiment, a classroom, a toolbox, a venue for presentation and representation. The Corner seeks to connect different ideas of culture and diverse communities through programming of exhibitions, events, educational initiatives, and research. It focuses on local cultural production and global contemporary art, drawing on intersectional LGBTQ perspectives to address critical issues of the contemporary life world. So for instance, right now it's closed, but I opened it with a pre-opening show way before we were actually finished building an institution, just because it seemed an urgent matter, about the children who are detained alongside the US-Mexico border. And at the time when we opened, there were over 7,000, there's still over 3,000 in detention centers. And at the moment, this number is diminishing because a lot of people are quite secretly, stealthily at night put onto planes and flown back and dropped in their countries where they originally fled from. And about 1 year ago, a bit longer, some people who were monitoring the situation of the kids got testimonies from them, and these testimonies were given to artists in a call to action, and artists reacted on it. And these works are going to be sold, and then that money goes to groups on the ground helping the kids. And I decided, okay, we need to show this work in January, at the beginning of the election year, 1 mile away from Trump. So I opened up the exhibition for that show, which is not necessarily an LGBTQ topic, because I'm not looking for a identity politics. I'm looking for a perspective on a just world, and that is part of it. Slowing down, doing only things that have real meaning, changing the institutions of art. These are all calls that have come to be very loudly voiced in the past weeks and months. Well, I've started traveling that path over 10 years ago and intend to continue to do so at my own pace. I can't. I first have to share my screen, and then I can open up the PowerPoint. Sorry. Is that, can that be seen? I hope it can.
No. So go click share screen, and then find so you have to open PowerPoint, then click, and then go back to Zoom, click shared screen, and then click the PowerPoint from the Zoom menu.
Okay, the Zoom menu has a PowerPoint. Where is that?
So if PowerPoint is open, you go back to Zoom.
Yeah. Okay.
Got it.
Now you've got it?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. This is a work by Tina Gverovic. About 15 years ago, someone calculated the financial loss US companies incurred through workers' illicit practice of sleeping on the job. Indeed, the trope of the lazy sleeper is an old one, resignified at present in our more than callous attitude toward the homeless, whose sleeping bodies punctuate many a journey to and from work. Even in this most passive stance, someone simply disregarding normative codes and regulations by giving in to a physical need. Sleep seems suspiciously subversive. Less an act than a way of being, the sleeper, by sleeping when and where it is not condoned, challenges everyone else who is doing, working, functioning, functionalized. Contrary to the tree falling in the forest, the sleeper in the workplace or in public space affects and thus ever so slightly transforms those around them. Meanwhile, a highly profitable sleep industry is soaring. People spend thousands on products that promise more effective sleep. Expensive mattresses, white noise machines, snoring inhibitors, or self-help manuals. For instance, a book called Sleep Smarter, 21 Essential Strategies to Sleep Your Way to a Better Body, Better Health, and Bigger Success. Corporations, football clubs, and governments employ sleep coaches to prime their employees. The sleep industry caters to a working consumer's wish to sleep less, yet sleep more productively, and accommodates transnational industry, which has joined the state as a custodian of biopolitics. Jonathan Crary's 24/7, that's a book, 24/7, spells out in detail how the state and a capitalist economy are encroaching stupendously on the private sphere, in which sleep was one of the last vestiges of unfettered time. However, the symbolic impetus at work here might be less about making sleep genuinely productive than about rendering it not unproductive. It would be irrational if everyone stopped working quite so much. A study based on OECD and UN data shows it would be better for the environment, reducing emissions, cutting down on commuting, producing fewer goods, and using less in the way of resources. And we have seen some of the good effects of slowing down, even in such an uncoordinated, not called for event as is COVID-19 pandemic. Yet society seems to fear the consequences of this kind of change more than the inevitable future costs of current productivity. For this would mean a radical revision of capitalist production and consumption cycles around which the world at large is structured today. Could you please start the first clip?
Weston, the first clip, please.
Can you see it?
No.
Okay, try to do it again, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Here we go. Near the, that was a short excerpt from a long piece of music composed by Terry Fox. Near the city of Rennes, there lived a tenant farmer called Schmelke and his wife Schmelkiche. They had 4 daughters, all of whom slept in the same broad bed. Their names were Yenta, Pesha, Trina, Yachna. As a rule, the girls got up early in the morning to milk the cows and help their mother with the household chores. But one winter morning, they stayed in bed later than usual. When their mother came to see what was keeping them, she found all 4 struggling and screaming in the bed. Schmelkiche demanded to know what all the commotion was about and why they were pulling each other's hair. The girls replied that in their sleep, they had gotten their feet mixed up, and now they didn't know whose feet belonged to whom. And so, of course, they couldn't get up. When you see the woman in this little painting from 1882, you might think it's another Yenta, Pesha, Trina, or Yachna, who, after having been beaten out of bed by her angry mother, has found a new way to slink off, thereby providing Camille Pissarro with a picturesque motif. The impression is misleading. Note the rake beside her. This is indeed a woman not at work, but she's far from slinking off. Reading the image in light of the political upheavals in the French countryside at the time, and with the knowledge that anarchist Pissarro expressed his political sympathies in his art, it reveals itself as a depiction of a farm worker asleep and on strike. Much has been written about the clutches of late capitalism on our sleep. As Jonathan Crary says, sleep has been turned into a resource tied to production, consumption, warfare, and biopolitics. Now I would ask everyone to refer to the Vimeo clip and start the Vimeo clip not at the beginning, but at 14 minutes. So it'll only be something like 2.5 minutes, which you will be watching at the end of this clip. It's a small short scene from a film called Night Cleaners, which was done in between 1972 and 1975 by a film collective called the Berwick Street Film Collective. So the question is, how do I get at this? I don't know how to get at it. I can't get my I only see my screen.
Do you want to stop the share, Ruth?
Yes, I would like to people to start watching the film, but I can't do it myself because I don't know how to get the screen has disappeared.
Do you see something that says stop screen?
Yes, okay, now I see it. Thank you so much. So that's a 14 minutes. So we watch from minute 14, okay?
And the password is R, capital R, U-T-H. Ruth with a capital R.
It's not allowing me. Erin, you'll have to tell me when you've watched it because I can't open it up. But it doesn't matter, I know it, so.
Okay. I'm finished, Ruth.
Okay, thank you. This is a drawing by Isabel Sally, and it's a muzzle. It's actually drawn after one of those sleep helps that you can buy on the internet. What does it do if we keep on representing? Oh, sorry. Much less has been written about actual struggles to resist this development. Indeed, while many have noted of the predicament of being simultaneously enticed to sleep less and to sleep more efficiently, the recent sleep height delights in either regurgitating the capitalist dystopia or in exploring Morpheus' realm, as if it were uncharted terrain. What does it do if we keep on representing a dystopian perspective within the framework of cognitive capitalism? Obviously, it is important that contemporary conditions be analyzed. Yet I cannot help but notice that while some are capable to capitalize on their critical activities, the agency of others who are bearing the brunt of economic inequality is being obscured by the concentration on capitalism's pervasiveness. Concrete labor struggles and anti-capitalist success stories seldom enter the discourse around sleep. Here's one example of workers sleeping while on strike for better wages and better working conditions in 2015 from a factory in Shenzhen producing Uniqlo clothes. And here, an only superficially similar image of a worker sleeping at work circulated by Chinese government in support of its current policy of promoting sleep as a way to optimize productivity. And here is Jürgen Stollhand's reflection on the Chinese dream from 2018, a campaign launched by the Chinese government about the same time as the Uniqlo strike. Chinese dream advertised with a symbol of this red stone at the bottom. So there are two drawings, one on the bottom and one on the top. So this advertised the symbol of this red stone was, as President Xi Jinping put it, a call on young Chinese to dare the dream of revitalizing the nation. And what you see here is actually an installation view of the exhibition sketch about this topic that I made in Beijing. The promotion of sleep in order to optimize productivity is a global phenomenon, but don't kid yourselves. All over the world, workers still lose their jobs over unregulated sleeping. And what does it do if we turn to our fascination with sleep into cultural production without considering how this might still mimic the ideology of sleep optimization? We end up feeding the creative industries with sleep performances, sleep hotels, sleep music, sleep philosophy. Capitalism, biopolitics, and cultural production are thus linked. Yet the discourse around these configurations tends to follow the well-known rhetorics of a chasm between art and critique. It presents aesthetic practice as either easily adaptable, politically ready-made, or as irrelevant to the topic, unless said practice behaves in its most literal sense as political art. And it posits anti-capitalist theory as a radical politics per se, as if theory were essentially good. However, what this produces first and foremost is the figure of cognitive capitalism in the figure of the theorist. This is bad enough. But what is worse is that the proponents of real historical and ongoing labor struggles all over the world vanish from discourse, made invisible, as cognitive capitalism fails to represent them. Those succumbing to a need to sleep are not the only ones sleeping in factories or public space. The history of sleep strikes and sleep demonstrations has yet to be written, but it is alive around the globe. And so I have put together some images of real people demonstrating or on strike, so in order to put them back into the field of visibility. And this compilation of images culled from the internet is helped along by an excerpt from composer Olga Neuwirth's piece, or from a part of composer Olga Neuwirth's piece, No More, from 2009. And that, Aaron, can you help? This is the second clip. Can you post that?
This is the second clip, and password is Ruth, capital R. Ruth. I think we're ready.
Okay, are we ready to continue?
Yes.
Historically, there are many instances of people using sleep as a conscious act of resistance. But one might also argue that today's systemic sleep deprivation cuts us off from the potential use of uselessness. The capacity to think outside of the box and potentially create other visions of how we want to live a good life, or even simply change how society works, is tied to the freedom to let our minds wander, which is something we're prone to do when dreaming, or even when half asleep or half awake. Dreaming, in a materialist and in a metaphorical sense, is an activity that allows us to dare think beyond social or self-censorship. And maybe that is all creativity is. Alejandra Riera's drawings inachève février-juillet 2019, unfinished February-July 2019, and I think I have more. No, I just have this one here. There are a series of drawings. Depict the fusion of people and nature, transcending an enclosure of forbidding concrete walls. And in the artist's own words are, and I quote, simply the expression of a vital desire to stop the fires that destroy the possibility of connecting beings, whoever and wherever they may be in the world. But to return once more to sleep. In much of contemporary cultural practice, subversion is naively considered a given, as if sleep were in and of itself some magical mechanism of freedom. As if sleep were a practice without a context. As if subversion and resistance weren't part of a struggle, an individual and political struggle. If we want to politicize the discourse around sleep, we might start thinking the social conditions from the sleeper's point of view. Haitham El-Wadani, the author of the compelling Book of Sleep, which was first published in 2017, but has yet to find an English outlet. I think it is going to be published and towards fall, winter of this year in English, despite being beautifully translated by Robin Moder, takes up a specific historical moment of post-revolution in Cairo, with its urgent question of how to go forward after a certain kind of activism has been brutally deflated. El-Wadani refuses to think of sleep as a passive act. I quote, "Sleep does not deny the possibility of revolution, but is one of its necessary conditions. For within itself, it carries the potential for awakening, for being reborn, for starting anew. Any sleep not open to this potential is not sleep, but rather a coma or death. What revolution requires is awakening, not wakefulness. And without passing through sleep, we will never attain awakening. Permanent wakefulness does not necessarily equate to permanent revolution. It may also be an eternal somnambulism. An artist dealing in several works with somnambulism is Turkish artist Gülten Mustafa. And for my sleep show, she made this little sketch from 2018 called Somnambule. And she wrote a little text that accompanies the sketch, explaining what somnambulism is, basically sleepwalking, right? And as you can see in this image, you have a still from, it's a collage of a still from a Harold Lloyd film called The Somnambule. And you have in the background an image of Istanbul, and she is in with watercolor painted in onto the houses some Turkish flags. And the last, so she just explains what somnambulism is, and then the last sentence of the explanation is, we feel like somnambules in the new conditions of the old city. And she refers here to a period after, actually to the reign of Erdogan and the political conditions in Istanbul. Haitham El-Wadani and I have had some discussions about my insistence of correlating sleeping and dreaming in my exhibition sketches, Sleeping with a Vengeance, Dreaming of a Life. That is, of my attempt to cause others to dream of moving forward politically into an imagination of what might constitute a livable future. I assume Haitham finds this all too utopian or too psychoanalyst. And indeed, I must admit that I take great comfort in the way that media studies theorist Sharon Slavinsky makes use of Sigmund Freud's definition of dreaming as nothing more than a particular form of thought made possible by the state of sleep. Dreams think, she writes in her 2018 little booklet with the title, How to Do Things with Dreams. And she proceeds, I quote, Freud called dreams the guardians of sleep, but they're much more than that. These night watchmen have preserved the integrity of our mind, guarding over our capacity to articulate experiences in our own terms. This psychological labor of symbolization helps us work through the struggles we face. Dreams transfigure their experiences, giving them a new form in ways that keep us alive to life. End of quote. I believe that Sharon Slavinsky's activist practice informs her use of the trope of dreams think as a means towards treating individual experience as exemplars of civil resistance. On the other hand, I'd also claim that an analogy can be drawn between the idea that dreams think and that works of art think. In other words, rather than emphasizing the utopian angle of dreaming or dreaming up the good life, it is my contention that, like dreams, works of art are capable to produce other forms of knowledge that might not hold up to rational argument, but would nevertheless be helpful in conceiving of alternatives to dystopia, either by the invention of another symbolization of reality, or by attacking symbolic structures of conventions of reality on a deep level, or by giving us energy to rethink problems for ourselves, or by challenging our spectatorial subjectivity by providing us with an aesthetic experience, understood in the anti-formalist understanding of the aesthetic as discussed by philosopher Juliane Rebentisch time and again. And I'll give you a quote from Juliane Rebentisch. She says, The object's aesthetic quality is not tied to certain properties of the object that are defined in advance, but must instead be understood as a product of experience, initiated in the engagement with the object. If under the conditions of the dissolution of boundaries, the aesthetic can no longer be understood as the objective other of the non-aesthetic, that does not apply a renunciation of aesthetic thinking, but a shift with that thinking. Far from facing the non-aesthetic as its external other, the aesthetic consists now in its reflexive transformation. That's from an article called The Contemporaneity of Contemporary Art from 2015, and it's probably good to read it because that's like philosophy, not so easy to understand on the first time you hear a quote like that. Amongst many others, one obvious difference between the act of dreaming and the making of a work of art would of course be the self-reflexive aspect of contemporary artistic practice, which cannot be said to be true in the same manner as in dreams, unless one casts individual dreams and dream work towards an audience of willing spectators, as I believe Slavinsky is trying to do. In the end, my analogy might not hold up for long, but when it comes to activating resources, practices rather than states of consciousnesses, in order to think ourselves out of the damn situation we are in, I would propose that no attempt should be cast away before it has been tried and proven to fail or to succeed. My exhibition sketches are indeed attempts to engage with the way that specific artworks think and speak. These works, more or less literal in their political ambitions, but mostly less literal and more ambitious in their aesthetic politics, that is, may help us to ask amongst many the following questions. Can sleep be configured as a radical subversive activity? Can the act of dreaming, sleep's correlate, be imagined a political deed? If sleep were to obstruct the cycle of capitalist production and social reproduction, would the sleeper be able to dream up a better life, a better future? But is it still we, the receivers of these works, who must ask and answer these questions? Sleeping with a Vengeance, Dreaming of a Life does no more than bring together diverse works in order to start understanding how we might share agency in a future politics of sleep. It focuses on particular aesthetic forms that might activate the latent resistance of sleep against being functionalized and might nurture the act of dreaming and its potential for revisioning the world. In my view, Haitham El-Wadani's writing, while focusing on the political and theoretical potential of sleep, seeks such a dreamlike aesthetic form. Referencing Walter Benjamin and other dialectical thinkers, it hovers nonetheless in the most beautiful and effective way between theory and poetry. Listen to El-Wadani on capitalism. That's a chapter called Starless. Unconsciousness is sleep's corruption, occurring when sleep has failed to extricate itself both from the binaries of its environment and from the function assigned to it, to become no more a brief dowsing of consciousness. Industrial capitalism reduces sleep to a function. It's tasked to grant a measure of relief to the collapsing consciousness. It regulates it as a shift, 8 hours long, followed by the shift at the factory. But high capitalism, which no longer produces anything at all, came to regard sleep as a black hole. Sleep was a short swoon, a begrudged break in the flow of uninterrupted communication, and as such had to be quickly shaken off and a rapid return made to a state of contact. As the attention economy replaces the production economy, consciousness becomes neurotic, turning endlessly about itself and fired by a promise forever unhonored. How can such a consciousness sleep? Is it constantly afraid that it might miss something, that the promise will be honored while it is absent? All it can do is remain alert until it drops into unconsciousness. Capitalism's night grows shorter and shorter until it almost disappears altogether. And in it, sleep is one long coma dispensed in small doses. Now listen to him on sleeping in the public sphere. And that's a chapter titled Reassured. Beyond the social is space for negotiation and struggle, for the exchange of views and dialogue, another hidden aspect emerges. The social as an arena for shared silence. Sleeping on public transport, in squares and lecture halls, at work, is a redoubled rejection of the social act, for it takes place not in the bedroom, but in the traditional sites of social interaction. The sleeper at work prevents himself from working. The sleeper on the bus fails to view the roadside advertisements. The sleeper in the square aborts his communication with others. Sleep taps the public sphere with its wand and transforms it from a space for negotiation and struggle into a site of silence and absence, both of which become a collective activity and not a private matter. Yet for all its social inadequacy, sleep does not transform the public sphere into a place of coldness and deliberate disregard, but, what's strange, into a site of trust and reassurance. For there, at the heart of the social disengagement created by sleep, a new trust in others can be discerned. A trust whose origin remains mysterious, for the public sleeper neither negotiates nor struggles with others, does not ally or interact, but instead surrenders himself, reveals to them his weakness, his insubstantiality, his incapacity. Sleeping in public is therefore a declaration of faith in the random other. The other of the public square, besides whom the sleeper lies contentedly, is not one individual, but a group of strangers, a group whose member the sleeper has no desire to know, but whose plurality he finds reassuring, allowing him to become, like them, a stranger. But why exhibition sketches? The curatorial model of the exhibition series is based on a much needed ecology of scale. Starting in 2018 with the tiniest of budgets and working with the smallest of institutions, Yellow Brick in Athens, Litos in Prague, and the Institute for Provocation in Beijing, the first exhibitions of Sleeping with a Vengeance, Dreaming of a Life, were conceived as sketches. And here you see the Vasily to the left, who runs Yellow Brick in Athens, and actually it's her studio, but her practice is a practice of hosting. So she invited my students and me to make an exhibition there, and here you see us actually writing Haitam's text on the wall Wherever we went, we wrote items, text on the wall or on banners, but always in the language of the place where we were. So we're actually writing it in Greek. Here you see images of the exhibition. And here's Litos. And so that was one of the very important aspects of making these sketches was and this is my idea also of kind of slow curating, or of curating that is very mindful, is to really look at what is the situation and what is helpful in this situation. And in the situation of Athens, it was also that I was coming in with students to Athens because our institute was going to Athens, so it wasn't my choice, that's just what happened. And that by making this exhibition here, we could actually support Vasiliki in keeping the space up and running, because Athens, as you might know, was also in 2018 in a severe economic crisis. So we were interacting with her. It was a true collaboration. At Litost in Prague, there was another aspect. This is again a former student of mine who's running these, or former students of mine who are running this space in Prague. And it's a tiny space. I had a lot of work, so the question also was how to make that with little money, because I basically did all of these without really any budget at all. So everyone kind of chipped in, and how to make it when you can't buy frames or so. So I was really interested in this curatorial problem of how to show many works in a small space like that. This is how it ended up looking. And then the smallest of the spaces was in Beijing. Basically, what you see in this photo is the whole space. And by that time, I'd accumulated many works of art. And it was clear that I could not show all of these works in this tiny space. So what I decided was that we make an archive. And here you see the artist Annette Rünzler, who made our archive boxes. And then all our sketches went into the archive, and the exhibition mostly existed on people asking to see works from the archive, and these works being ceremoniously brought out so viewers could demand, like in a library, to look at these works, but it was very performative and ceremoniously. And the thing that I might have failed to mention is that, making an exhibition without money, the way it went, or the reasons why I decided to work like that, was because I'd been talking to my artist friends for many years without having the opportunity to show their work that they wanted to show with me, because making an exhibition is a way to find something out. So they were interested in this process. And then we just decided, okay, we're going to start with sketches. So I asked everyone to just provide sketches. And I showed these sketches, and the idea was that you do that over a long period of time. So this series of exhibitions is not finished yet. And that whenever we got an opportunity to make a show with these sketches, that would be an opportunity to have a new discussion and to make an evolution within their works as well, so that their process of working on a subject is also long-term, where they're showing their intermediate products or their intermediate ways of evolving a work. So the exhibition would also be a way to transport the evolution of their works. And that whenever we would get money, then we would go to a second stage, and at least some people would get some production money so that they could kind of make out of their sketch a finished work. So I decided to posit these sketches. Let me see if there's the next one. To posit these sketches against the usual curatorial practice of accepting exploitative conditions of work. I'd rather work for free and within my own framework. Nevertheless, I would like to work first and foremost because exhibition making remains for me the most inspiring form of engaging with the works of the artists I learned from. Yet if we were not to want to self-exploit, we need to take care of ourselves. And that means to stay true to the conditions of work, hence the sketches. The aim is to become more solid in time. In fact, last year, Württembergischer Kunstverein in Stuttgart invited us to take the next step toward becoming just that, with the next iteration of Sleeping with a Vengeance, Dreaming of a Life. And they provided us with a proper production budget and also the infrastructure and the know-how of the people who are working there. And these are amazing people. Everyone from the cleaning woman to the directors of the space are just special beings. And so so they invited me. It's one large, very, very large room, a square room, and usually it's very much in a grid, the way that it's composed and shows work. And I wanted to break the grid because it seemed not good for me for the topic. So I made a kind of model that you can see here, where you have a kind of inside of the cycle and outside of the cycle, and inside the cycle circle are more of the works that deal with sleep, and outside of the circle are more the works that deal with dreaming or a trance-like sphere feeling. And but that's not completely kept to, so it does change a little bit. You see the entrance to the exhibition. And here you see how it looks inside. And if you look to the far side, you might see the how Jürgen Stollhand's work is hung on this paravent, this pink paravent in the back. The work that I already showed you in Beijing. And here you can see the way that the outside functions. The trance and dreaming sphere is dark and the sleep sphere is light. And you can meander from inside and outside. In front, the work by Ines Dujac is a collage that deals with hops, which is what is used to produce beer, but also is a narcotic in many places in the world. And in the back, you see a sculpture by Zheng Mala and a group from an artist group from Hong Kong who are dealing actually with Cambodian textile industry. In Cambodia, a lot of the textile factories are erected on the former killing fields, and textile workers keep falling in trance or keep falling down and being kind of gone. And they claim they're possessed by ghosts, the ghosts from the killing fields. So the factory owners have started this kind of ghost house where they can be treated against being possessed by ghosts. And here you can now see Gülsen Kara Mustafa's sketch, the Somnambule, in its final iteration, in the way that it's now been produced into a video that very much deals with the gentrification of the city. And in the middle, this round thing is actually the archive. So where artists had been able to produce work, their sketches, their former sketches, were entered into the archive in the center of the room, which was freely accessible to people. So they could open up the boxes and look at works, and every box carried one work. As a curator, I do not use artworks to make an exhibition form. I'm also made and undone by the works themselves. And thus I would like to end with one last excerpt of Haitham el-Madani and one more clip. A fragment from Alia Syed's 2011 16mm film, Priya. This last excerpt from Haitham is called The Kingdom of Things. The room is full of things. I'm sorry. The room is full of its things. There's a little desk by the door and a lamp beside the bed. There's a suitcase against the wall and a flower pot on the window frame. In the desk drawer, there's a passport and a marriage certificate, and lying in the dresser drawer, a gold earring, a bracelet. A bright shirt has been carelessly tossed over the chair, and abandoned on the floor is a sock inverted. We leave all this behind and are drawn towards the gulf which is called sleep. There, for a moment, time stops, and we imagine that we have moved elsewhere. But as soon as we enter it, we are cast back into the room itself, this time not as a presiding force, but as one thing among its many, the thing which we've become in sleep, propelled by irresistible sympathy towards the other things and seeping now bit by bit onto the pillow, then onto the bed, then out into the room. And just as we are transformed into things during sleep, so the things in our room transform into beings other than those we know. They lose their passivity and gradually return to themselves. No longer objects and implements, they are now bodies through which a secret inner motion flows. They are our things, which we resemble and which resemble us. And the deeper we fall into sleep, the more we settle into these things, or they into us, or all of us together into the room. In the fraternity of sleep, we do not encounter things along the line of power, but rather in the primordial matter, in the heart of its becoming. The flow of its first forms runs through us, and in us beats a pulse as old as the universe. And now I would like to ask you to play for yourself the last clip. Which Aaron has just typed in from Priya.
Okay, Ruth.
So I'm sorry, I probably impacted on your viewing pleasure by forgetting to mention that I had made a curatorial compilation of a song called Tu le Soleil by the Italian group called La Pigiata. So you might have been somehow disturbed by not seeing an image in the beginning. So I'm sorry if that is first the song, Tu le Soleil, and then the fragment of Alia Siad. So anyway, thank you very much. That's my talk. And I'm very happy if you're still awake to ask questions or give comments so we can have maybe a little conversation.
Thank you so much, Ruth. If anyone wants to ask a question, you just go to the Q&A and then I can open up your microphone and raise your hand. Brigitte?
Yeah, hi. This was a really heartwarming talk. I really, really enjoyed that. Thank you for that. I'm wondering how much sleep you get.
I love sleeping, but I don't get enough. Let's just say it like that.
Thank you.
Why do you want to know?
Because I think these are wonderful ideals, and I full-heartedly agree that there's a lot of work that happens while one sleeps that is not productive in a capitalist kind of sense, but more in a rejuvenating and maybe even spiritual sense. But a project such as gigantic as the one that you're undertaking would make me think that it is kind of plugged into that capitalist mode of production where one just runs and runs and runs. But at the same time, I get the sense as your talk evolved that it also takes you to kind of more and more humane space. And so I'm just wondering, how this will continue because it's really inspiring.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for explaining that. Yes, I think we live with contradictions all the time and struggle with them. And so it's good to have people to remind one of the fallacies or of sometimes even failures of one's attempts. And so I'm extremely happy to be surrounded by people who help with that, because I think that if you're just on your own and you don't, it is hard to remember or remind ourselves where we're, yeah, because it actually life draws us to being productive. And I've moved to the States about 7 months ago, and I'm in a privileged position of having a job and not being still having a job, but it also comes with almost no holidays. I'm not used to that as a European, and I suffer terribly because I miss my mother, miss my cute children, and I miss my lover. I can't see them because they're in Europe. I mean, aside from COVID and all of that, but just the fact that people here don't seem to take holidays. So I struggle, but it's also interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Brigitte is also from Berlin, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Mac?
Yeah, I think good. We're good. Hello. Yeah, I'm here with a small group of people in my backyard. Really enjoyed the talk, Ruth. Really great to see you again. One question I had was about the idea of performative sleep versus actual sleep and how that might function within the exhibition.
Mm-hmm. I think we didn't have any performative sleep ever in this exhibition. We had a few lecture performances, but no one ever performed sleep. But I have to tell you that I took my 16-year-old son with me to Stuttgart because I hadn't seen him in a long while, and so I was just flying back from the States to close out the exhibition, and so I took him from Berlin to Stuttgart and back. So I saw him for something like 12 hours. And he arrived in Stuttgart and lay down on the bed that an artist had made. So two artists made beds actually, and one of them was actually with a blanket, an embroidered blanket that was just really for sleeping. And he lay down there and he fell asleep. So for the whole time we were in Stuttgart, he didn't see the exhibition. We once tried, I told students in class already, we once tried to sleep in a museum. It's very difficult. You are normally not left alone to do that. But we didn't have any sleep performances.
I guess I maybe brought it up just because of some of the examples that you showed were some of them were demonstrations that were sleep-ins.
Yes.
Many of the images had people who were obviously not asleep, and it was very, it was more of an event where sleep was based. The idea of sleep was the idea, but that sleep itself may have not happened.
Well, that depends on the cases. I mean, I have a whole list of references for those pictures and what specific moment of strike or struggle or protest they have. So partially there's strikes and partially there's protests. In the protests, there are some performative actions. So people like the sleep-in at Reagan Airport is a performative action, right? But there are other photos where both the students, the disabled students in Berkeley and the students in Munich during this 1968 have actually occupied the university, or in other places, workers have occupied their factories, and then that sleep is real sleep. So they're sleeping there because they're living there. And then you have moments in, like, for instance, the democracy protests in Hong Kong, where people are just exhausted. So they're protesting long and then they're lying down because they're exhausted. So some of them might fall asleep. And then there are other people who are occupying streets in a performative way, like the ones in the yellow vests in Thailand. So they're blocking the streets by performing sleep or sleeping. And then there's people like the Bangalore textile workers, female women textile workers who are, no, I'm sorry, that was not in Bangalore, that's in New Delhi, who are striking for better wages. And they're actually sleeping in the street because as they're striking, they're not going home. So they're using the streets to sleep. But that is the one video where I asked you to scroll forward to 14 minutes. The first part is part of a TED Talk that you can look at on Vimeo about two filmmakers who made a film about New Delhi sleep communities. And in New Delhi and other places in India, but they've made this film about New Delhi, if I remember correctly, it's New Delhi. There are two types of sleep communities. A lot of them where workers are too far away, their homes are too far away, so they can't go home during the night. So they're kind of occupying the city, public space of the city, or sometimes markets or so at night to sleep. And there are vendors who will rent out, they're organizing this, and who will rent out the space. And if you have a little bit of more money, you will also get a mattress or Agnes, or you might also get a mattress, or you might get a blanket. And that's kind of a business that has become a business. But then there are other people who are kind of sleeping wildly, and they're congregating and working with each other. And there's even a film club under a bridge because it's very cool there in the summer. So these people are sleeping on the bridge and watching and screening films together at night. So there's all kinds of practices that are represented in these images.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Kalaya, are you ready? Just need to unmute yourself, Kalaya.
I didn't actually click that. I don't know. I was just listening, but thank you.
Okay. Your hand was up.
I don't
Okay.
know how that happened,
Okay.
but thank you.
Okay. Any other hands up? Okay. Lynn?
Yes, thank you. I guess I'm interested in, Ruth, your point of view. I mean, it was a very interesting lecture today. I really appreciated a lot of what you had to say, not only about sleep, but about how we perceive the relationship of where someone's sleeping and what it means. But I wonder how you interpret, the homeless who are sleeping, they're among the reassured because they do it benevolently because they have to sleep. And I have never seen anyone challenge them on sleeping in the sidewalk or in a tent on the sidewalk or on a bench or wherever. It's not a protest, but it's necessary. But it's very powerful because they claim property. They claim public property. And it becomes a powerful statement nonetheless among citizens of a community. And I wonder how you compare that to an organized or preconceived intentional sleep versus the sleep of someone who just has to sleep in a public venue.
Yeah. I guess that's a bit the difference between ethics and politics. So one can make us into a better human being, and probably if we are kind of mindful and if that does influence us in a positive way. But of course, it's not that it's always benevolent, because this is not just occupying territory, but often the cities are very aggressive towards people who are sleeping there. And in fact, I was in Oakland at the beginning of the year, and there are these people who I would have thought, Berkeley, Oakland, who I would have thought this is a community that's kind of traditionally left, even though that has changed a lot, also because it became so expensive, rents became so high, but still there are a lot of people living there who are kind of considering themselves somehow progressive. And I heard people, I was so shocked. I heard people saying that it's so unfortunate that so many homeless are migrating to California, and especially around the Bay Area, because of the better weather conditions, and that the city of Berkeley takes care of them and therefore doesn't have money to take care of the real citizens. And so there is actually a huge struggle going on around that. So, and cities keep cleaning up. And remember what Trump was saying about the homeless in California. So it's a kind of, I don't think that everyone is benevolent, and it kind of puts our nose into the fact that what we might want to think about society functioning is not functioning. So it's plus, and there are all these other aspects of physicality that come with sleep and with homelessness, smell, and I think mostly smell, that a lot of people find very difficult to deal with. So I think that it provokes in us a reaction that comes more from possibly, that comes more from developing a personal attitude that can be an ethical attitude and can lead to someone becoming active in this cause. Or then the sleep protest, which is more of a political because purposely negotiating form of sleeping in public sphere. Does that answer it a little bit?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think even in Portland, there's always been the dynamic between the citizens of Portland and how they deal with the homeless who are taking up public space, and, you know, not wanting to be offensive, but everyone has to have their rights, and it's a very challenging conundrum for everywhere. And yeah, it's not an easy solution.
I mean, one perspective, if I may, is that, of course, homelessness in such a capitalist country as the United States serves as a constant visual reminder and a constant, like, total sensory reminder of the effects of not being productive in capitalism. And so, unless you are working to yourself, you know, to this unbelievable, unhuman standards of production, then there's a very real chance that you will end up. The bottom in the United States is a pretty terrible bottom. Other countries as well, but it seems to be maybe the worst here in
Yes.
any place. Maybe
Yeah.
Brazil is a bit worse actually, but it's anyway for similar reasons. You know, a forgotten population that is sort of demonstrating what the values are of society.
At least in Brazil, I mean, I don't know what has happened with that under Bolsonaro, but before that, in Brazil, people who are in informal cities, so that was, nowadays they're called comunidades. We used to call them slums, but the urban political correct term for it is informal cities. Those people have the right to vote. So that I think is really interesting, because we tend to think, and I think, Aaron, you're completely right. It's kind of maybe homeless are left to be so as to warn everyone else, to pressure everyone else not to stop, you know, doing their bit. I lost my thread. Where I am, it's 10:45. So
Is there another follow-up, and then maybe we can?
I'm fine. I'm happy to go on. It's just that I'm
Let's just leave. Yes, thank you.
getting out.
So this is actually not Mac. This is Ariana.
Okay, Ariana, hi. I couldn't see that.
I was just thinking about the way that you framed the sleep as in opposition to productivity, and productivity being the requirement of capitalism upon all of us. And I've been thinking about I do union organizing at Portland State University, which is the public school here, public higher education school, and I've just been thinking about austerity measures that are going to be imposed on higher education due to the financial crisis due to COVID, and how austerity measures is a effort to make people be more productive with less. And I guess the question is more just around like how do we I guess it's just asking for advice in a way of like, how do we make more visible the political power of not being productive? Not a very good question, actually, but I think it just matters to me a lot right now. So
I think it's a really, really relevant question. But before I go into that, and you might have to remind me of the question, I want to say that I was trying to show that this is not a dichotomy. I mean, following Hightown, it's not a productive a dichotomy, because he thinks that sleep is the absolute essential requisite for activity. So maybe not productivity, but activity. And so he ties them together. He's going against that dichotomous way of thinking of being active and being passive. And then on the other hand, when you have when you're looking at the sleep industry, you can see, and the sleep coaching, then you can see that even for factories, the idea that sleep is anti-productive is not anymore taken. In fact, the Chinese factory ideology, this one photo I showed you, they're actually forcing workers to sleep, because they have noticed that when people sleep, then they're making less mistakes afterwards, so that they can actually exploit better when people have slept. Plus, then there's all this neoliberal self directing of sleep, making the sleep more efficient, that the whole sleep industry ties into. So sleep, and Jonathan Crary shows this also quite well, sleep is not the space anymore where we might, unless it's very visibly or actively used, it's not, or it is very contextual. Let's say it's very contextual when the meaning of it can't be necessarily put into these two into this dichotomy. And so the question of how can we make visible using passivity, using slowing down, using inactivity as a political tool. I think I'm not so sure about visibility anymore. I used to think that it was growing up, I always thought it was about becoming visibility. You know, who has a voice, who doesn't have a voice, for instance. You know, that was all the give a voice to. That was like the call to action. That is problematic often, because in reality, these voices are there and we just don't want to hear them. And we have seen this in Black Lives Matter, when people are saying, finally, Black people should have a voice. But in fact, it's Black community organizers who've been working all along the whole time, creating the models for how, for instance, police could be defunded. That is work that has been happening the whole time. It's just that wasn't, we didn't want to lose our privilege, and so we didn't want to listen to that, or take that very seriously. So the question of visibility as such, or that's problematic for me now. I mean, I've gone through phases where I feel differently about this, and I will probably still go through phases where I feel differently. Then in my socialization, there was a time when we were saying it's not about visible, but how do you become visible? And what are the structures of visibility? Because a lot of people, for instance, only become visible by victimizing themselves, or re-victimizing, or re-traumatizing themselves. And the way that the George Floyd video was shown over and over again and shared on Facebook by white people was a good example, where at some point Black communities said, stop that, don't do that. That's not your call to do that. So on one hand, that video helped energize the movement. On the other hand, it was perpetuating trauma. So the question of visibility is not a very neutral. Just being in visual field is not necessarily the good thing to go. So in order to think about all these things together and to try to begin to answer your question, I would say that it's more about doing than, small scale, but many and very locally. So I think that it's really, you know, you're a union organizer. Were you the union organizer?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, do it in your place. And then connect to others who are doing it in other places. So I think it's more about, you know, and to me, political struggle is about constant negotiation. It's about constantly defending your position, defending your practice, and not finding, you know, that one way of doing things rightly and then stopping to negotiate. And so I think it's this kind of, you know, you fall asleep and you're suddenly sleeping in your union meeting. What are others going to say? They're going to be upset. Then you have to explain to them why you're doing that. So I really, at the moment, I'm thinking small activisms, but connecting to other places who are also doing small activisms is the only way I can think of out of this way. I don't have another solution, but I'm also not I'm not a politician or a visionary in terms of that. So
thank you so much. That's actually such a lovely, inspiring, and possible answer.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Ruth. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk and for putting up with the clunkiness of Zoom. And thank you everyone for being here and asking great questions. And we have several hours tomorrow with the students to ask more questions. So I think maybe we all need to sleep.
Yay!
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See some of you tomorrow. Bye.